The Great Escape of Harriet Tubman by Reagan Jones and Lily Simpson.
Always remember you have within you the strength, the patience, and the passion to reach for the stars and change the world. Harriet Tubman.
This year's theme for History Day is Breaking Barriers. We will be talking about the life of Harriet Tubman and how she saved herself and hundreds of others from slavery. Harriet Tubman, originally named Araminta Ross, was the second out of 8 children to be born into slavery by Ben and Harriet Ross in the year of 1820.
Araminta often went by the nickname Minty. She was hired out by her master to be a family slave at the age of 6. Her job in the family was to be a nursemaid for a small baby. Araminta was severely punished for any minor infraction. An example of this is if she was to fall asleep, she would be harshly whipped several times.
Minty was often sent by her slave owners to run errands. At age 13, she was sent to the market store. While she was there, the store owner threw a 2-pound weight in an attempt to stop a thief, but ended up hitting Araminta instead. The weight hit against Minty's skull, leaving her unconscious. Due to this incident, she suffered with epileptic seizures for the rest of her life. Her skull was permanently scarred.
When Araminta got older, she stopped being a nursemaid and served as a slave spy in the Civil War and an activist in the struggle for women's suffrage. Later on in Araminta's life, she fell in love and married a man named John Tubman. Araminta decided to change her last name to Tubman and take her mother's name. This is when Araminta Ross officially became Harriet Tubman.
Harriet became a conductor on the Underground Railroad, leading slaves to freedom before the Civil War. Many people wonder how Harriet helped slaves escape. Harriet helped slaves escape by returning to slave-holding states many times, leading them safely to the northern free states into Canada. Harriet decided to go back and help slaves because she thought that if she's free, her family should be free too. Harriet is the most well-known of all the Underground Railroad conductors. Harriet made 19 trips into the South and escorted over 300 slaves to freedom. Many also question how Harriet made it to freedom. Harriet made it to freedom by following the North Star, and if there were no stars, she followed the river.
After Harriet escaped slavery, she got remarried in 1869 to Nelson Davis and opened an old age home for formerly enslaved people and an infirmary providing free welfare to anyone black or white in her 70s. Tubman spent the years following the war on this property. Harriet bought the land in early 1859 by Senator William H. Seward in Auburn, New York. Harriet was never financially secure, so Harriet's friends and supporters were able to raise some funds to support her. Sarah H. Bradford, an admirer who wrote a biography that entitled Scenes in the Life of Harriet Tubman. All proceeds, money that was raised, went to Tubman and her family. Harriet donated a parcel of her land to the African Methodist Exponential Church in Auburn in 1903. The Harriet Tubman Home for the Aged opened on this site in 1908.
Tubman died of pneumonia on March 10, 1913, at around the age of 93. As Tubman aged, her head injuries sustained early in her life. It became more painful and disruptive. She had brain surgery at Boston, Massachusetts General Hospital. After surgery, Harriet was admitted into a rest home named in her honor. Harriet was buried with military honors at Fort Hill Cemetery in Auburn. Every great dream begins with a dreamer.
Harriet was widely known and well respected when she was alive. Years after Tubman died, she became an American icon. She was named as one of the most famous civilians in American history before the Civil War by a survey at the end of the 20th century. The city of Auburn commemorated her life with a plaque at the courthouse when Harriet died. The Harriet Tubman Home in Auburn and the Harriet Tubman Museum in Cambridge serve as monuments to her life. Many schools in the 20th century were named in her honor.
The U.S. Treasury Department announced that Harriet Tubman would replace Jackson on the center of a new $20 bill. The announcement was made in April 2016. Many celebrated the decision as Tubman devoted her life to racial equality and fought for women's rights. The unveiling of Tubman being on the new $20 bill was planned for 2020 to coincide with the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment that gave women the right to vote. On the other hand, no new designs will be unveiled until 2026, says Stephen Mnuchin, due to what is called counterfeiting issues.
Harriet is a huge turning point in history because she helped hundreds of slaves escape slavery. She inspired slaves to stick up for themselves. Harriet is a great role model and put her life at risk for slaves to gain their basic right to live freely, pursue life, liberty, and happiness. Even though Harriet couldn't free every slave, just knowing that she was willing to risk her life to free slaves is amazing.
The eastern shore of Maryland, where she was born, the Harriet Tubman Underground Railroad Visitor Center opened in 2017. This tiny woman who could neither read nor write now has not one, but 2 national parks dedicated to her story.
Would this have looked the way it did when Harriet Tubman was around here?
Yes, it would have looked exactly like this.
She was born.
She talked about how lonely and sad she was when she was separated from her mother and how she would cry herself to sleep at night.
And then came the day when she was about 13 that she walked into the Bucktown Village store, just as an overseer was trying to catch a runaway.
When the overseer picked up one of these store weights, a 2-pound weight.
That's heavy.
Yes, and he threw it, intending to hit the young man who was fleeing. But Tubman had stepped back into the doorway, and it slammed right into her skull.
Were enslaved on different plantations.
And that far farm on the other side of the river.
Hours apart.
Minty's life as a slave was horrific. It was brutal. It was cruel.
She and her mother were owned by Edward Brodus, who made $60 a year, renting her out, starting when she was 6. Who was Harriet Tubman really?
This is just the Tubman scrapbook, as my mother called it.
To Judith Bryant, she was Aunt Harriet.
I'm a great-great-grand niece.
Descended from Harriet's brother, William Henry Stewart.
Yeah. He and 2 other brothers she rescued from Maryland in 1854.
She's got bragging rights, but chooses not to brag.
It's my family. People always say, oh, I didn't know you were related to Harriet Tubman. Of course you didn't, but I did. We did.